Welcome, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give it just a minute or two just to let these last folks start trickling in. Um, if you'd like to, feel free to put your name and your organization in the chat while you wait, and we'll get started shortly. All right, I'll go ahead and get us started then. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the second training in our NOFA series, our applicant and scoring workshop. I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS, and I'll be leading the training. We always start off our presentations with a bit of housekeeping. So this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the website soon for your reference and for anyone who wasn't able to attend today. We ask that you please stay on mute during the presentation and while others are speaking, and you can enter your thoughts and questions into the chat at any time. But we'll also pause a handful of times to answer questions. At those points, please feel free to raise your virtual hand to speak. For today's agenda, we'll start with an introduction and some key documents, then dive right into the scoring rubric and our threshold scoring criteria. I'll talk about the application workbook, and then we'll dive in and I'll show you the actual application in a brief demonstration of how it works. We'll end with an explanation of exactly how OHCS will review your application and finish with a brief ask an expert section. This is a really busy agenda today, so just to make sure that we get through the entire presentation, I ask that you please keep your questions relevant to the content of the presentation. If there's time left to the end, I will happily stay and answer any other questions. Otherwise, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any other questions that we're not able to answer today. I presented the timeline at the last meeting, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I just wanted to remind everyone that we are accepting pre-applications now. We recommend you submit your pre-application early. We'll begin accepting the full applications on February 24th. And you don't necessarily need to wait to submit on that date. You can click the submit button in Procorum as soon as your application is done. We'll just adjust your initial submission date to February 24th. And then the deadline to be considered for cohort 1 is March 10th, and the deadline for cohort 2 is May 12th. At the general information session, we tried to present a very broad overview of the NOFA process from pre-application to award. We presented this slide showing that awards will be issued on a first-come, first-served basis to applicants who meet all mandatory requirements and reach a minimum score. We spent a lot of time talking about what first-come, first-served basis means, and we talked about the mandatory requirements. Today, we are going to focus almost entirely on that last little highlighted section, reaching the minimum required score. And in case there's anyone here today who was not at the general information session, I wanted to provide just a few key terms that I'm going to use a lot in this presentation. So LIFT is our funding source that supports homeownership development. OAHTC is our funding source that will support permanent loans for limited equity co-ops and manufactured home parks. Threshold scoring is the stage where we evaluate your application for minimum thresholds to be approved for the program. Initial submission date is the date that you actually submit your application, which is when you click that submit button in Procorum. And then final submission date is the date that we use to determine who is first come and first served. That is calculated as your initial submission date plus the number of business days it takes to send in any missing documents or provide any other missing or requested information. I'm going to be talking about two really key documents today. The first is the scoring criteria and rubric, and this document is available on our website and contains both the minimum scoring criteria and a really detailed rubric for how every item in your application will be scored. We hope that you will use this document to help you tailor your narrative responses to address what we're looking for, and then also to help you score yourself to determine if your responses are missing anything before you submit. The second major document is the application workbook. We have two boxes on this slide to represent the two types of application workbook. In the blue box in the middle, there's just the standard application workbook. This will be what most of you will be filling out. It includes basic information and data about your project, the pro forma, anything related to the scoring criteria, and a document checklist. And you'll use this to apply for funding. The other version of that application is the abbreviated application workbook. It contains all the same things as the first, except that it only has one page for narrative responses, and it's considerably shorter. This version can only be used if you're applying for 4 or fewer units. If you're applying for 5 units, you'll need to use the regular application workbook. And I'll dig into that scoring rubric first. Just a reminder, this scoring is for LIFT funding. If you're applying for OEHTC, that portion, or if that's the only thing you're applying for, that'll have more of a pass-fail minimum requirement and won't require this scoring criteria. You may recognize this slide from the general information training. This is really as deep as we got into the threshold scoring. Today, I'm going to talk a lot more about the threshold scoring, but I probably won't get into much detail about each of these individual categories since all of that information is in that scoring criteria. This is another slide from yesterday, but I wanted to bring it back as a quick summary of what we'll talk about today. First, you'll need to reach a minimum score in each of these categories. Second, that minimum score will vary based on if you meet our special eligibility criteria and where you sit in that portfolio risk review. And then the last point is that as I go into more detail today, remember that your scores are not competitive and you don't need to earn every single point. The scoring criteria are written to allow multiple pathways to reach the minimum and give us the opportunity to give credit where that credit is due. And then just one more reminder slide from the last session. I mentioned the RESCS special eligibility, which stands for Rural, Emerging, Small, and Culturally Specific. I won't dive into the definitions again today, but I did just want to remind you to please read those definitions in the NOFA document glossary before you make a determination about your own organization. All right, so we're finally going to dive into new material. These are our minimum scoring requirements. This information is also available on the first page of the scoring rubric document with a little more information. You can see our 6 categories in the first column and the total points that are possible to be earned in each of those categories in the second column. For those first 5 categories, the last 2 columns show the total number of points that you're required to earn to pass each category. The first column is the requirement for all general applicants, and then the second is that slightly lower requirement for the RESCS applicants. The final row is for financial viability and risk mitigation, and it's a little different. Rather than the points required for everyone and then risk, It's broken down by medium and high risk applicants and low risk applicants. And I'll get into how that's determined a little bit later. One thing I want to point out on this slide is just that reminder again that you need to earn, or you don't need to earn every point. Some of these categories, you still need to earn a lot of the points. I'm looking at stewardship specifically, where there's 13 points, and a general applicant needs to earn 10. But others, there's actually a lot of wiggle room, like in the equity and engagement and the project details sections. These sort of wealth of available points is so that we can award the diverse range of work and opportunities that each applicant provides. All right, and I'm not going to go question by question in today's training or look at specific items in the rubric. I had originally planned to summarize the big questions in each of the different scoring categories during today's training, but I'm not actually confident that we'll have time and also be able to answer questions. So I've left the slides in the presentation, and these will be available on our website soon, but I'm not going to go into them. If you have any specific questions about anything in the rubric, I can answer them at the end of the presentation if there's time, or feel free to reach out to me directly. So excuse me while I click through all of these. All right. So I'll just dive into some more specific items on the scoring rubric. The first thing I wanted to talk about is how to read it. If you've already looked at it, you've probably noticed that it's divided into a bunch of different tables that look like the one on this slide. These tables were designed to match up with the application as best as we could get it. So the dark blue box at the top, labeled 1, is going to be either a heading with some questions following it, or it will correspond with a specific narrative question. This example is a narrative question. In this example, box 2 on the left is going to be specific scoring criteria and will line up with the scoring criteria in the application. This box could also be questions if box number 1 is a heading. Box number 3 shows how that item will be scored, and box 4 shows the points that it's worth. In this case, the first criteria is describing a comprehensive outreach plan. You can get 2 points if you provide a thorough plan that ensures your focus community will have access to your project. You can get 1 point if you provide a description of your plan that doesn't really support your focus community. And then even though it's not listed, you can get 0 points if your response just doesn't address the question. Box 5 is just a slight difference in scoring criteria. These don't have a category, they're just considered individually. These items will also line up with the scoring criteria in the application document. And here's just another example of the other type of table. The dark blue box at the top is actually a heading description rather than a single narrative question. And then each box on the left corresponds to a specific question in the application. And you may have noticed that the scores and the scoring boxes were a little bit different, so I wanted to briefly talk about those. The first is ranked scoring. This is the example that I just provided, where we'll look at your response and award a score based on how it fits within the rubric. You can identify these in a rubric by the way the numbers are written as 210 or 21 or 321 or something like that. The second type is what I'm calling, just for this presentation, additive scores. You can identify these by the plus sign on the scoring rubric. Instead of being ranked, these are kind of a pass, fail, true, false, where if that criteria applies to your response, you'll get the point. In most of these cases, I would recommend that you keep an eye on the scoring rubric as you answer these narratives and make sure that you're addressing any of the items that are applicable to you. In the example earlier, these criteria included a point for describing an equitable method of identifying and selecting buyers, as well as a point for describing post-purchase support. And those are 2 very different things, but they apply to the same question. If you don't provide post-purchase support, then feel free not to include it. But if you do, don't lose out on that point because you didn't think it was applicable or you didn't notice it in the rubric. And then the last item in this is the special additive scoring. It's also listed with pluses like the regular additive scores, but questions where the supply are flagged with this little talking bubble with a star. And that's in both the scoring rubric and the application workbook. What this means is that you don't need to try to respond to each item listed. These are broad questions where the scoring criteria was built to offer points for a wide variety of services that applicants can provide. This came about because last year we had a really strict scoring rubric. We received a lot of really great stories and work that people were doing that were incredibly impactful and relevant, but because we hadn't written them into the rubric specifically, we couldn't give anyone credit for these really great things. So this special type of question tries to correct for that. And in these cases, just tell us about the work that you're doing and let us give you points for it. And then I'll show you the actual rubric in a bit when I do the demo, but I think now's a good time to pause and see if there are any questions about some of these really specific items, but also the scoring criteria in general. So nothing specific, but just kind of in general.
Jessica, we don't have any questions in the chat thus far, and I don't see any hands raised. So if anybody does have a question, I guess I can unmute and ask.
I have a question related to the first come, first serve, if that's a good time to ask.
Go ahead and ask, and I'll if it's a
Okay.
quick answer, I'll answer it.
I think I hope it's quick. So you said that you begin accepting applications on February 24th. However, you can submit before then. If you submit before then, are you saying that that date, all of those applications submitted before February 24th are then sort of put at the same threshold of the 2/24 date?
They are. So
Okay.
since we're opening applications on the 24th, we're kind of anticipating everyone is going to apply on the 24th. You don't have to apply on the 24th. So I wanted to have the option where you can submit earlier so that you're not all ready with your whole documents and like waiting for the time clock to turn over to click the submit button and everyone doesn't log in and overwhelm the system or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. But to be clear, then there's no advantage to submitting before then.
Exactly. There's no advantage to submitting before the 24th.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's a good question related to what I said. So thanks for asking. Anything else?
Not that I can see. So.
Okay, good. All right. Then the next big thing in the scoring rubric is the portfolio risk review. And this is new this year and an additional requirement for us because we're awarding funding beyond the value of the land and beyond our ability to kind of secure our funds. Its purpose isn't so much to evaluate you as an organization and how risky you are, but I hope you think of it more as us evaluating the risk of your share of our funding portfolio. So the idea is to kind of assess and prevent risk of one significant issue with one project causing a cascade of issues with a substantial kind of chunk of our portfolio. So this review that we'll complete for your organization, it'll look at how much funding you have with us for projects that are not complete. It will look at your timeliness, the financial health of your existing projects, and your communication with us. We'll assess a base risk based on your funding, and then we'll consider some additional risks if there have been any issues with those other 3 items. So here's how we calculate your baseline risk score. You'll be given a risk of 0 to 10 based on what percentage of our portfolio your organization will have if this project gets approved. This chart on the left is a box and whisker plot showing how organizations currently fall on the percentage of our portfolio. If you're not familiar with box and whisker charts, what this does is divide our entire portfolio into quartiles. So a quarter of all of the organizations go in each little segment. So starting from the bottom of that chart, roughly a quarter of funding recipients have between 0.2 and 0.6% of our portfolio. A quarter has between 0.6 and 1.3% of our portfolio. A quarter has between 1.3 and 4.5%. And then the final quarter has between 4.5 and 8.7%. And then anything above 8.7% is an outlier. And you can see these 2 examples who have a pretty substantial percentage of our portfolio. So basically, if you're down at the bottom there, your score is going to be 0. If you're at the middle number of 1.3, your score will be 5 because half of our partners have more funding and half of our partners have less funding. And then if you're one of those outliers, your score will be 10. And I use percentages here to demonstrate the reasoning behind the numbers we chose, but in the actual form and when we actually do the calculations, those got adjusted to dollar values, considering our 2025 funds and considering our 2025 funds. I also want to clarify that you will not be considered high risk solely based on funding. So remember that this is 1 to 10 risk, and we don't start high risk until 11. So whatever your baseline risk is, we may add to it based on these other factors, and we can add up to 8 additional risk. We can't reduce your baseline risk, unfortunately. If you generally meet expectations in these categories with no issues, your risk will not increase from your baseline risk. That's also if you're a new applicant, we'd only consider your application, and then we don't have a long history with you where we can assess these things, and we don't have active projects with you. So this part, you'll just be 0 if you're a new applicant. So we're going to look at your timeliness. The first is looking at your active projects and if they're on track to be completed on time. If you have a tendency to not meet our 3-year deadline, we're going to increase your risk. We also look at how well you meet deadlines for document submission. So this will consider things like closing your lift loan and those regular reports that you need to submit. Financial health looks at your existing projects with us, if they've had budget issues and how they were solved. If they have had budget issues come up that you needed to update with us, but you had a quick and easy resolution for your all on your own, we're not going to increase your risk because you identified and executed a solution. If your budget issues caused delays or required major changes to your project, then you might see that number go up a little bit. And then the last category is communication. And this is important because I know hearing those first 2 categories, someone could probably think, well, I just want to tell you about my problems then. We do very much appreciate it when you're transparent and reach out to us early with any issues so that we can keep an eye on them and also serve as a resource to support you through those. So if you don't do that and you wait until the last minute to tell us about things, or if you don't respond to our attempts to reach you, that may also increase your risk as well.
Jessica, can I stop you for a moment? We have some questions coming in that I think are relevant to keep going.
I do have one more risk-related slide.
Okay, you tell me when.
Okay. All right. So what does the risk review mean for you? Remember that your baseline risk can be 0 to 10, and your additional risk can go up a total of 8. So that means the range of potential risk is 0 to 18. So if you're 0 to 4 points on the risk scale, you're considered low risk. You'll have the lower scoring threshold on the financial viability scoring and no additional requirements. If you're between 5 and 10 points, you'll be considered medium risk. You'll need to reach the higher minimum score and then receive at least 3 points in the 2 risk-related questions in this application. That is actually all of the points that are available for those questions, so just make sure that you have a solid response for those. And they're marked in the rubric with an asterisk. So long as you read the rubric, you should be able to identify those. And then if you're between 11 and 14 points, you'll be considered high risk, and you'll need to meet all of those same requirements as a medium risk organization, and also provide at least one additional risk mitigation measure, like a guarantee or performance bond or minimum liquidity. There are some other options in the application, so if you think you might be high risk, make sure you look at those. And then if you get 15 or more points, we will deny your application, but that high of a score would mean that you have a lot of money outstanding with us, and you also have a lot of problems with your projects. So I don't really anticipate anyone reaching that point. Now we do provide a copy of our risk review form in the scoring document, so you're welcome to assess yourself. If you have any concerns about the accuracy of your self-assessment, please feel free to reach out to us and we can complete this risk assessment early. Please just give us 10 business days to do this so that we actually have time. Don't ask for it on February 23rd or March 9th, right before submission deadlines, because we won't be able to have it done on time for you. And since there's a lot of risk questions, go ahead, Susie.
Yeah, thanks. One is a question about what is included in the risk assessment. Is this just lift homeownership projects, or does it also include rental projects or other OHCS funding?
Good question. We're only going to look at your lift homeownership projects and any HDIP projects if you have those. And it does include, if you have lift and lift supplemental, the dollar amount includes both of those combined.
Thank you. Another question says, the NOFA says the portfolio risk assessment is for projects for more than 4 units. Smaller projects do not have to complete the risk assessment. Is that correct?
That's a good reminder, and I did not include that in the presentation, but if the NOFA says so, then that is correct.
Yeah. And one last question here. Oh, it may have just been answered, but how will we know where we fall before we submit between low, medium, high, so we know how to answer and how many?
Yeah, that is a good
was,
question.
yep.
I'll just answer it again just to make the statement. Yeah, you can complete it yourself because it is there and it's transparent. But if you're worried or if you find yourself like, oh, my own score is right on the border between medium and high, so I want to know for sure. Yeah, just reach out to us and give us those 10 business days and we'll get it done for you.
Otherwise, that's all that I see in the chat, and I don't see any hands up.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, everyone. All right, so the scoring document does include a couple of other items. The first is information about the scoring gap interview, which I'll go more into detail on later. Then there's a section for scoring that abbreviated application with projects with 4 or fewer homes. These applications actually just have 4 narrative questions that you need to answer, and we'll review those as pass-fail. You will need to pass all 4 of those questions to move forward to funding. And this was my original place to pause for questions. So I guess I'll just pause for 1 second, and if anyone has anything, you can raise your virtual hand or just speak up. If not, I will just keep going. Okay, so next up then is the application workbook. The first thing with the workbook is that you need to make sure that you're using the right one. If you're building 1, 2, 3, or 4 units, you can use the abbreviated application workbook. If you're building 5 or more units, you'll need to use the full application workbook. You'll see the little notice here on the side that is on the abbreviated workbook. If you're building 5 or more units and you see that on the instruction page, you are using the wrong workbook. And if you submit the wrong workbook, you will need to resubmit the correct one. In this case, we're not just going to add time to your final submission date. We're actually going to reset your initial submission date until you submit the correct application. So please do make sure that you have the right one. There's also a separate application if you're only applying for OEHTC and not applying for LIFT. Unfortunately, I won't be able to cover that one today. We're actually still getting it finalized and hope that it'll be available soon, hopefully next week, fingers crossed. But let us know if you're like really hanging on and ready for that application so that we can work with you on that. The workbook itself includes all of these instructions, but I figured I'd include them here in my presentation. The workbook is a locked Excel document with multiple tabs that need to be filled out. So some basic Excel navigation skills are required. The application is formatted in the colors shown here, and this legend is on every page. So those lighter blue boxes are where you type responses. The darker blue boxes typically have drop-down menus, and then the gray boxes have automatic calculations in them. Those lighter gray boxes are locked and you can't edit them. And then the darker ones are able to be edited in case your situation is different than what's typical. There will be a lot of different tabs to keep things organized. You will need to scroll to be able to access all the tabs, and you can do that using those highlighted arrows here. Those will be at the bottom left corner of Excel, and I'll show you that a little bit later. You'll also see a lot of cells with these little red arrows at the top right side. You don't need to worry about that. Those just indicate that we're going to pull that information out of this and put it into our internal data system. Your application will be the place where you answer your the scoring criteria questions, and also where the scoring actually happens. So your self-score and our scores will go here. And this is what it's typically going to look like in the application. You'll have a large narrative question or a series of short questions, and then a scoring block that'll relate directly to what is above it. The scoring block will relate directly back to the scoring rubric tables that we already mentioned. You'll want to fill in your self-score where it's clearly labeled. Then when we go to score your application, we can compare our scores with your self-score to see if we missed anything or if this is a good place to check in with you if you don't meet the minimum scoring requirements. And then I also want to call out these two items. So we talked a little bit about the little voice box with the star already for those special additive criteria. It's also clearly marked in the application to the left of the questions. It'll be in column A of your Excel workbook. And then you'll see another little marker on all of the narrative questions here where that second arrow is pointing at the end of the question. This is a replacement for the recommended word count. Instead of telling you not to exceed 250 words or 400 words and making you feel like you really need to actually type that many words to have a good response to the question, we're just instead telling you the amount of detail that we want in your response. So this guide is also in your instructions in the application workbook, but I do have it here. Those markers will just be letters in parentheses, either C, B, or A. And a good way to remember what they mean is like a grade in school. So C is going to be less effort, B will be middling, and A will be kind of an overachiever. But also note that those are all passing grades. So for C questions, we'll just want a sentence or two answering the question. Assume we know what you're talking about. B questions should have a more substantial response, but we don't really want you to go into the weeds. Don't necessarily respond with bullet points, but think of it kind of like the way that you would use bullets with brief and clear explanations. Then A questions are going to need, they're going to need to be really thorough. These are questions that might ask you for a lot of different pieces of information in one question, or really allow you to expand on the things that you're working on that we'd like to learn more about. So I do have some really silly examples for you, and you're about to learn more about me than you probably want to, but I love my pets, and I think everyone likes seeing fun pet pictures, and I have 4 pets, which is exactly how many examples I need to give you. So let's take this example question that's just tell me about your pet, and this one is a C. So the response is short and simple. My dog Blaster is a 7-year-old pointer mix. He loves blankets and hates the rain. Even though it's really short and sweet, you still get a lot of information. You know he's a dog, you know his name, you know his age, and you know he's a pointer. This assumes that you know what a pointer is, but if you don't, you should be able to easily Google it. The second sentence adds a lot of context easily and can kind of paint a cozy picture. And you can see it, right? You can see the picture of a dog curled up under a blanket by the fireplace while it's raining outside. And while I don't have a picture of that exactly, I do have this one of him in a sweater. So I hope you all like my little sidetrack of pet pictures. So moving on to the next one, same question, but B for details. Uh, and I'll read this one out loud. It's Goblin is an adorable Black American long-haired cat with yellow eyes. She's also 7 years old, adopted as a kitten. She's long and lean and has the quietest meow you ever heard, but a loud purr. She loves hunting for bugs and finding the highest point in the house, even at her own risk. She often appears on video calls with me because she doesn't like sharing my attention. Unfortunately, she doesn't like strangers, so most people will never get to know her true personality. So this one's more substantial. You learn similar things as you did to Blaster, but with a lot of added information like her eye color, her weight, a little bit more specific details of her personality. And again, the response was still pretty specific. You can definitely picture a little Halloween cat. And here she is enjoying a little laundry basket. So let's move on to the A example. And I'm not going to read this one out loud because it's really long, but I just wanted to summarize. Again, this is a little bit of a step up in information about Marvel from the B rating, a little more specific. And then I highlighted this piece on the slide. It's about Anatolian Shepherds, which is Marvel's breed. There's a substantial chunk of information, and it's not necessarily tied to Marvel specifically, but Anatolian Shepherds aren't a well-known breed, so this additional information really helps to contextualize things at this A level. It's also possible that there were multiple scoring criteria here, as we demonstrated in the scoring criteria section earlier. So maybe I could get 2 points for providing a good description of my pet and 1 point for demonstrating an understanding of my pet's breed. So that piece there would get me that additional point. Anyway, if you don't know what an Anatolian Shepherd Great Pyrenees mix looks like, here he is. He's very fluffy and he likes the cold. All right, and then this is my last example, what not to do, and I'm going to read this one even though it's really hard for me to read out loud. Pixel is my favorite of all of my pets because I have had her for almost a decade. She has been a dream of a cat and has been with me through many stages of my life, and she is the cutest cat. House guests often comment on how beautiful she is, one even claiming she looks like a model. There are so many wonderful things that I could share about Pixel, but my favorite story is when she was young. I tried to train her to walk outside on a leash and harness. I eventually managed to walk her a good distance from our door before we ran into someone walking their dog. The experience scared her so badly that she never let me take her outside again. So there's a lot wrong with this one. First, it really focuses on opinions and how I feel about my pet rather than just talking about my pet. I say a lot of times how great and beautiful and wonderful she is, and even though I may feel that way, I didn't provide any proof of that whatsoever. I also went on this totally unrelated story about taking a cat for a walk. So if I was scoring this, I would give it 0 points. I learned nothing except maybe that I might be a crazy cat lady. So here she is. I hope you all agree that she's very beautiful, but you you really don't have any idea what she might look like going into this. And I mean, for all you know, she could have a snaggletooth. All right. Anyway, back to being professional. I do have just a little bit more narrative guidance. Um, I just mentioned the self-scoring briefly. I really encourage you to be thoughtful about that and really consider that self-score to be part of the application. Using the scoring rubric, just like we will to evaluate your own responses, that'll help you preemptively find any gaps in these different scoring criteria. And if you do that, you can prevent needing us to follow up with you and hurting your chances to be first come, first served. Be clear and concise in your responses. My example using Pixel was especially egregious, but it's actually really common for us to get narrative responses that are a lot of filler. Think like 2 paragraphs of words, but really only just 1 or 2 sentences buried in that that actually answer the question. And we're scoring a lot of applications, so it can be easy for us to miss the actual answers when they're buried in fluff. On that same note, please don't feel obligated to fill all the space for every question. There's a lot of space in these questions just in case someone has a lot of meaningful things to say, but I don't want you to fill that space with things that are not meaningful. And are there any questions before I dive into the memo? Or I'm sorry, into the demo?
No questions in the chat. I don't see any hands. And it seems as if people loved your stories.
Thanks for that. Good. Well, I'm going to take the fact that there's no questions as me doing a really good job talking about things and maybe going into a little too much detail. So I'll go ahead and move on to this walkthrough. I'm going to wing this a little bit and see how it goes. Okay. So this is and I'm sorry, my screen that I am presenting on is over here, so I can't look at the camera at the same time. So please bear with me. This is our scoring rubric document, and let me know, I guess, Susie, pay attention and let me know if someone tells me if I need to zoom in.
Okay.
The first page of the rubric is basically that table that I showed you with some expanded information. So we've got the developer capacity here, and then the total possible, minimum required, and risks required. These additional sections here relate to the section headers in the actual rubric below. So this is a good quick reference to see what you're required to earn and where you can get those points from. Financial viability is separated a little bit just because we talk a little bit about the risk mitigation up here. Reminder about the little voice bubble with the star. And then here you can see your first table. And we already discussed this. I'm not going to talk about it again and waste anyone's time. But this is just kind of how it's organized. You've got your section header, then different tables that relate to your questions. There's some of these items that are highlighted in orange, that those are documents that you need to submit. So just trying to make a really clear reminder that documents are required for this question. Scrolling past all of these questions. There's a little explanation about the scoring gap interview here. Again, I'll go into this shortly more towards the end of the presentation. Here's your scoring for applications with 4 or fewer homes. So we've got the question that you have to answer, and then kind of a vague description of what a passing description looks like, and a vague description of what a failing application looks like. So this is a good place to look if you're doing 4 or fewer applications. And then the actual risk assessment document is here at the end, and you don't have to fill this out. This is just for your reference and if you want to try to do a self-score, but this is exactly the document that we'll be filling out internally. And I used the percentages in the presentation, but these are the actual dollar values for what those scorings are. If you're asking for less than $350,000, you would be a 0. If you're asking for less than 350,000 and don't already have projects with us, you would be a 0. But you can see there's a pretty big range from 350,000 up to things that are greater than 15 million. So there's that. And then down here, after you add your additional points to it, you can calculate your actual risk level here. Any specific questions about this document or anything you want me to scroll to and look at if you've already had a look at this document before I move on to the application?
We do have 2 questions in the chat, but it's
Okay.
not particular to the scoring document. But I think you could answer them quickly. Would you like them anyway?
Yeah,
no?
sure.
Okay. So could you please explain the purpose of the talk bubble with the star symbol again? Do they act like bonus points?
Yeah. Let me actually get to an example with the talk bubble. Okay, here's one. So this is talking about, oh, not this one. This is a bad example. Hold on. Let me get to the equity section, which has really the best examples, I think. Now I scroll too high. Okay. So here's a good example with a little talk bubble. Its purpose is that you don't need to feel like you need to meet each and every one of these criteria. This list of criteria is here just so that we can award points if someone does something like that. So it's basically just giving us the opportunity to give you credit for the things that you do. So this question is, how does your organization promote equity and/or incorporate the voice and perspective of your focus community internally? And the options here include you describe inclusion of your focus community in company processes, such as inclusion on your staff or board or volunteers. And it's okay if you don't have that. You won't get this point, but we just want to make sure that people who do can get that point. And then similarly, applicant describes an internal policy implemented to improve equity or work with their focus community. If you've done that, that's great. We definitely want to give you the point there, but if you haven't done that lately, then that's fine. Most of these questions will also end with this question of applicant describes any other innovative measure that promotes equity or considers the focus community internally. This one ends with applicant describes any other event or method that promotes equity during early development phases of the project. So all of these also just kind of end with, if you have something else that we didn't preemptively think of to include here, that's kind of our opportunity to give you a point. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. Do you want all staff bios for the applicant organization or those most relevant to the project? For example, construction manager, executive director, etc.
Good question. We actually ask for specific staff members. So like in the staff experience section, we'll ask for really specific roles. And then we also ask for your project managers for your active pipeline. Those are the staff bios that we want. We don't need every staff member that you have, just the ones that you mention in the application to get credit. And I'll actually show you where those lines are when we get to the application. Anything else, Susie?
Looks like that's it. Other than I can just respond to say that, yes, this recording will be made available to attendees.
Yes, absolutely. All right, then I will move on to the next document, which is our application. Oops. So when you open your application for the first time, you should see this page right away. This is the instruction page. If this was the abbreviated application, the big warning box that I showed you would be right here at the top of this page. So hopefully very easy to see. And then all of those instructions that I gave you are right here. And then there's also some instructions for respond or for like technically how to respond and input your narrative questions in this system that I didn't want to talk about with some assumptions that I can walk you through this during the presentation or during the demo. So all of the tabs are down here at the bottom. And if you're not super familiar with Excel, you've got these little tiny arrows here. These are the arrows that you can use to navigate these tabs. So if you click them, it'll scroll over to the right and left because we have too many tabs for the screen to show. If you're in the abbreviated application, you will have all of these same tabs up to project uses. And then this capacity experience and moving right, that'll just be one tab for narratives. And then this document checklist here at the end. So just a little bit of a navigation feature. Going through the tabs, I'm not going to fill out a whole lot of information, but just to show you that these spreadsheets are locked. So if you try to type somewhere where you're not allowed to, it'll give you this little pop-up that the sheet's protected. So don't try to type where you're not supposed to. These are those light blue boxes where you just type your own responses. So here's your project name, total units. This is an example of one of those items going into our system. If you mouse over it, you see this really weird formula. Just ignore it. And then these dark blue boxes are going to be where those drop downs are. So if you click on them, it'll make this little arrow on the right side, and then you can click it and pick the appropriate drop down option. We include a couple of links to give you resources to help you fill in some of this information. So at the general information session, we told you to look at the online map to determine if you're rural or urban. The link's also here. You can just click it and it will pop up the map here. And just in case you haven't looked at this, you can just click OK. The blue areas are considered rural. The red areas are considered urban. And if you happen to be in one of these green areas, let me know and we'll have to figure out how to handle that. Because there's just not enough information using this methodology to determine it. So you can zoom in using your scroll wheel or these plus or minus buttons. Drag by clicking and dragging, and then you can also use this little search button in the top right corner to type your address, and it'll exactly where you are. So quick, just sidetrack tangent on that. This project information page, there's no scoring tied to this, but this is information that we need to collect about your project. So please just work your way through this and fill it out as accurately as you can. Most of this will go into our data tracking system. The next tab is development team. This is just so that we know who the different contacts are, who to reach out to, and all of those necessary details about you as the applicant, your developer, if it's different from you. If you have a different shared equity manager, like you're just the developer and you're going to pass it over to a different community land trust, this is where we would want that information. Any consultants, and then just some other major players in your development. Development schedule. This is where we want you to put your development schedule. There's a couple of key dates in here that we'll use during the preliminary review. Let's see, some of those are going to be your closing of lift and other funding. That's going to be, the deadline for that is within 6 months. So we'll want to make sure that that is feasible within 6 months. Then you've got your construction start, which has that 12-month requirement. And then certificate of occupancy. I think we're actually looking at this estimated place in service. Susie, do you remember which of these we looked at for the preliminary review last year? Did we just look at this?
I think we'll be looking at the certificate of occupancy because that's what we need to happen within that 36-month timeframe.
Yeah. Okay, so make sure that this is your final certificate of occupancy here. Within 36 months. All right, and then the sources and financial assumptions and project uses are going to be your pro forma information, and I will go into detail in this, or go into detail about this at the next training. So I won't spend any time here today. And here's where your scoring criteria starts. It just asks you a series of questions related to all of our different scoring criteria. So here we've got your current project pipeline. So we'll want you to fill in your current project pipeline, and then we'll have our scoring block related to that here. And then we'll have you submit your financial statements, and here's the scoring block. And that's just basically how everything is organized. So we've got your questions, your scoring block, your question, your scoring block, your question, your scoring block, every single section. It's going to be just that. And then we have these little orange callouts that are supposed to give you advice to preemptively answer any questions you might have. And then scrolling all the way down, everything has a built-in scoring summary. So after you score yourself, and then after we score your different answers, they'll all kind of fill in here to get your total and compare against the minimum that you're required to earn. Is there anything specific that I wanted to pull out in any of these? Oh, here's where your little talk symbol with the star is, just right here in column A. Hopefully that's really easy for you to see. Project details is a little bit different because it has, as you scroll down, it has a lot of these really basic questions, and then it will automatically calculate your score based on your response. So you won't need to score yourself. These will just automatically come down into your score total. Stewardship. Nothing special here. Nothing special in financial viability.
Jessica,
And
we do
then,
have a question referring to the development schedule.
oh, sure.
Okay. So can you clarify what vertical construction refers to? Does site work have to start within 12 months?
Site work does not need to start within 12 months. Well, I guess site work does need to start within 12 months because you need the site work done before you can start building the structures. That 12-month deadline refers to when you start building your first structure up. There is some flexibility. We're not going to take away your funding if you don't start vertical construction within 12 months. We know that larger projects or projects that require a lot of site work are going to probably take a little longer than 12 months to get started. It's really that 36-month deadline that's really important because that's also our deadline to spend all of the funds. So that's the one that we really need to make sure that you're meeting. The 12-month deadline is kind of just a way to keep track and make sure that you're on track to getting everything done on time.
Thank you. That's it.
Oh, great, thanks. Okay, yeah, and then the last page in this application workbook is the document checklist. We've got a really clear list of all of your documents that you need to submit here in column D. We've got a description of the documents, and then this column shows if there's a form that you need. If there is, that's going to be in your Procorum Work Center, which Susie gave a tour of earlier this week. Where to upload, we tried to make it really clear if this needs to be uploaded in the Project Work Center or in the Partner Portal. Again, descriptions of that were in the last training, so if you weren't able to attend that, you can go back and watch that training once we get it posted. On the left here is if this was submitted. So this is dark blue, so it's going to be a drop down and it's just yes, no, or not applicable. So just make sure that this is your checklist. Make sure you go in and actually check all of the boxes because we will look at this. We'll look at this. And it's also just a good way for you to track it. Just a couple other questions here. Okay. So that's the basic tour. I did want to give you one example of inputting a narrative question, just so I can talk through those technical things. So I'm going to go over to this equity and engagement page and scroll to this question is, how does your organization promote equity and serve your focus community in marketing, outreach, home sales, and beyond? And I have typed a totally fake response in my word processing document here. So what you're going to want to do is, type it in the word processing document because Excel is difficult to type in. Then you can just copy and paste it. And what you want to do when you go to paste it is you're going to want to double click into it because if I try to paste it without double clicking, I'm going to get this error that says that the data is not the same size.
Can you
And you
enlarge
don't
that,
want
Jessica?
that.
Sorry to interrupt. We're getting for a
Yeah.
a request to enlarge.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Yeah, so since you don't want to get that error, you want to double click in here You can tell it's working because your little cursor will flash, and that's when you can paste your information here into the box. I also wanted to show you self-scoring. So we're going to take my little example here. Excuse me. We've got Paradise Homes strives to ensure the development can be accessed by all kinds of homeowners, especially those of our target community. Our outreach plan is the following bulleted list here. Interested applicants can submit an application and will be added to a wait list. We require everyone to complete a HUD certified education course. And then thanks to an incredible donor, all of our new homebuyers are gifted a care package that contains things that are helpful. So I'm going to open this guy up here and this guy up here. And I'm going to scroll to that equity question, which is right here. And you can see these lines are going to relate directly here. So applicant describes a comprehensive outreach plan, applicant describes a comprehensive outreach plan. So that's going to be your direct relationship. So let's review my response. So this first one is, do we describe a comprehensive outreach plan? And the first is that we have a well, I already explained this exact question. I did describe an outreach plan, but I did not describe anyway how my focus community is included in that. We just talked about, we posted it online. We have a network of realtors. We put a community bulletin, newspaper ads. That's really not enough information. So if I were scoring this, I would probably give this response a 1. So let's put that in our self-score box here. The next one is applicant describes a comprehensive home buyer education program, either in-house or through a partner. And here's how we review that. Applicant or partner provides a robust menu of pre-purchase education and counseling, or applicant partner provides standard home buyer education and counseling. My response just said we require them to take a course. And that is, this question is an A. That's really not an A-level response. It doesn't give a whole lot of detail. Maybe a scorer might give it a 1 because you at least mentioned pre-purchase education. Maybe they'll give it a 0 because you require them to do it, but you don't really provide any of the services or partner with anyone to provide those services. Maybe you do, but you just didn't describe it here. So go ahead and skip this one for time's sake. But the last item that I included was we give them a care package. That's not really post-purchase support. So I'm not going to count that as credit for this post-purchase support line here. But it is kind of a cool thing, right? To help homebuyers have the things that they need right after they purchase their home. So I'd give them 1 point here. So let's say they earn 0 points here. So we've got a total of 3 points. And then you can either submit it this way if you think you'll get all of the points somewhere else, but my recommendation would be to kind of see this gap here and say, oh, we didn't actually talk about post-purchase support. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So this is how I hope that you'll use these 2 documents. I have them lined up exactly so that you can more easily kind of make sure that your responses are covering all of the bases that I hope that you'll include. And that's the end of my demo. We only have 20 minutes left, so hopefully there's no questions. If there are, go ahead and raise your hand. So I don't want to tell you don't ask me questions if you have some.
Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Jessica, I have questions on more clarifications on specific questions. Is this an okay time to ask that?
Can we actually wait until the end? And if there's no time, you can absolutely reach out to me or set up a call or whatever you need to on specific questions.
Okay, yep.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. Okay, so I'll go ahead and quit with the demo. Maybe. Sorry, the Teams controls are all up in the way. Okay, great. So I just have one other section to talk about, and then I want to make sure that our expert has time to speak because I really appreciate her being here today. So the last thing I want to talk about is our actual process for getting your application scored. And this is our basic process. Once you submit your application, it'll go to preliminary review where we'll check for completion and all of the pass-fail items. If there's anything missing, we'll reach out to you to get all of that squared away. Once your application is complete, we'll move on to threshold scoring. If there's any concerns or gaps there, we'll move on to gap mitigation interview and then clarify any points with you. And then assuming that you pass that, we'll move on to award determination. Oh, I should actually make this a slideshow and not just PowerPoint. Okay. We talked about the preliminary review at Monday's presentation. I included this slide again just as a quick reminder of what that entails, but I'm not going to go into detail on it. This information is also in the NOFA document in the last few pages. So here's the actual process that we'll go through. We'll have an internal document that's basically just a checklist of all of the items on the first page. One of my colleagues, and right now that's going to be Tasha, will go through that checklist for your application and make sure that everything's there. And then she'll send that to me. If everything isn't there or there are any issues, I'll double check for those missing items, and then I will reach out to you. And then it's my responsibility to keep track of the time that it takes and that impact on the final submission date. If you initially pass the preliminary review or once your application is complete, it will move on to the threshold scoring. We'll have a small team of 3 or 4 scorers, depending on how many applications we receive. And one of those scorers will be assigned as the lead on your application, and another person will be assigned as a second scorer. Those 2 team members will independently score your application. We'll have regular scoring meetings. Your lead will introduce your project to our team, and then we'll go through the 2 scores together. If both scorers indicate that you reached minimum requirements, then we'll consider you passed, and then we won't go any further. We don't really care if one scorer gave you 1 point on criteria 1 and 0 points on the other, and the other scorer gave you 0 on the first and 1 on the other. We just care that they're both comfortable with moving you forward. But if one or both of the scorers do not show you reaching minimum requirements, then we'll have a deeper conversation on the category or categories that you may not have passed. As a larger team, we'll go through each item and talk about your responses. Sometimes the scorer who didn't pass you may have missed something and we can resolve that and move on, but sometimes the group will determine that we need more information. And if that's the case, we'll move on to this gap mitigation interview. Now, the gap mitigation interview isn't necessarily an interview. It could be an email if the resolution to that gap is really simple, or it can be a meeting if the concerns are more substantial. How it works is that essentially we have some very specific questions in mind that we'll want you to answer based on your application. Sometimes we'll just pick a low-hanging fruit that you might have missed and ask you about it. Other times we'll have some specific concerns that we ask you to address. Also, one important note is that you're not guaranteed an interview if you don't pass the scoring criteria. This is only for if we identify a pathway for you to move to passing. If you don't pass by a significant margin, or if you don't pass several categories, or if we have significant concerns despite your score, we do reserve the right to deny an application without an interview. Now, we think this interview will be most common for the development experience and capacity categories. If you applied last year, you might be familiar with the gap mitigation question. This is kind of that replacement. This is kind of an opportunity for you to identify any kind of red flags that we might find and preemptively tell us why that doesn't matter or what you're doing to fix or resolve those. because it's kind of replacing this thing in the experience and capacity category, and the fact that we'll have a lot of people vying for first come, first serve, we are going to accept requests for gap mitigation meetings before you submit your application, but only if you identify a gap. I want to clarify that this is not an opportunity for everyone to come and talk to me about every single point that they might not have, or that they may have lost or might not be able to get, just in case. This early mitigation interview is specifically for anyone who has already completed self-scoring and found that they either don't meet minimum standards or are kind of right on the edge. So here's just a little bit of guidance if you like to do that, or if you would like to do that. So first you'll need to identify your own gap. We're not going to pre-score your application for this meeting, so you will need to come in with an idea of what would probably flag a concern. Second, come prepared with an explanation of how you're mitigating that gap. I might have some specific questions for you based on the discussion, but for these pre-scoring meetings, we want you to know what the gap is and clearly identify something that makes up for it. If you do choose to have one of these early meetings, we can't guarantee that the meeting will make you pass threshold, but we will consider your response and gap mitigation when we officially score you. If that early mitigation interview preemptively addresses any concerns we have, you will move forward and we won't add any time to your final submission date. If we find that the gap is wider than we preemptively discussed, or if there's another gap somewhere else in the application, we may still need to do a second interview, which will impact your final submission date. And now I go into a lot of detail on that because I want to make it clear that we will work with you to get your applications to a place that it can succeed. And I want to make it clear that if you look at the scoring criteria and it makes you concerned, that there is some flexibility and you can always come to me with those concerns to talk about potential solutions. So if you're a new organization without a lot of experience, I don't want you to feel like this program is not for you. I want to work with you and find a pathway to succeed. However, I do hope that most of you won't actually need this. The goal is for most applications to pass on their own without this interview. So that's it for our internal process. I'm not going to pause for questions right now, just to make sure that we have enough time for this next section. But if there is time at the end, I'll just open it up for any questions. Great. So if you were here on Monday, you may recall my attempt to get people to share tips and tricks and talk amongst yourselves and how it did not work out. So today, Sarah Padilla has graciously agreed to join us to serve as our expert and share her experience and provide some tips and what she has learned. Sarah is with Habitat for Humanity Oregon and supports a lot of Habitat affiliates with their applications. And I can confidently say that Sarah has filled out more applications than any other person. So she is really the expert on this. So thank you for joining us today, Sarah, and I'll go ahead and pass things over for you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. I do have some notes, so I may not be looking directly at the camera, but thank you for the opportunity to join you. I don't know that I am an expert. That may not be how I identify myself, but this is my 4th year completing LIFT applications in partnership with our Habitat for Humanity network. So I definitely want to acknowledge that it is a partnership. It really is a team effort. We have 23 different affiliates, and I want to say maybe getting close to half of them, if you include this year, are applying for these really important funds. So over the 4 years, I have completed quite a lot of applications, and that's, I think, the best way to learn is really to do them. So I've been asked to just provide a few sort of tips or learnings that I think may be helpful. And I think the first thing I would share, and some of these is stating the obvious, but I think it is important, is to read the NOFA. Take a highlighter, read it, and then read it again, and really take your time, because they do change year over year a little bit. I notice some a lot of stuff, stays the same, but there are some modifications, some new information. So I really just encourage everyone to read that NOFA very closely and research if you're not already familiar with the LIFT program, really take some time to research what the goal of the LIFT program is and think about how your project might align with those goals, right? The other thing I would share is to really sort of humanize the grant application, tell your stories, share some real life scenarios. And that includes, positive and challenges. I think being really realistic is important in considering uh, considering how you're making a compelling case, for these funds, and using data. I would also suggest, whenever possible, to look for data that is as local as possible. I think that, some of your communities, your cities, your states, if you can, describe. OHCS is of course well aware of the housing crisis, so I don't think you need to necessarily go into a lot of detail on why, we need to build affordable homes for sale. But I think learning a little bit about your communities, is important, especially in those places where LIFT maybe has not had any development yet. Let's see. Collaborative efforts. Yeah. So I would mention, it could be in the equity section, it could be in other sections, but think about the partnerships that you have in your community, and they may not be formal contracts or documented partnerships, but I'm almost certain that everyone is really working, with their city partners, with private and public funders, with other community members. So think about mentioning those partnerships. I think it makes a stronger, kind of a stronger case, and it kind of enhances your ability to deliver results. I would, let's see, with the application, I do think this training is really helpful. The application workbook, which is the Excel document that Jessica went through, it can be a little bit intimidating. There are a lot of tabs, a lot of information, but again, just not rushing. When you go through that material, I would absolutely work on narrative questions offline, like on a Word document, before you sort of are putting everything into that workbook. I would save that, till you're more ready to apply. And then for me, I worked with an editor for a long time who really, really helped me as a writer. And so I am a little picky about grammar and typos and mistakes. I just feel like, it happens. But I think if you can get someone to be like a peer reviewer, I think that can be very helpful. It's not always possible, but it is helpful for just another set of eyes, to see about, are you making your case, and are you being clear? And, I appreciated what Jessica said about not using filler, just kind of look at the question again and look at your response and see that that they fit. So as far as sort of document review and documentation, there are a lot of different required documents, and I think this can be pretty straightforward, but just compiling those. I track everything in Excel typically, just staying organized, and I would say start early. If there are forms that you don't have on hand, or you're still in the design phase of your project, start early, so that you're not rushing and scrambling kind of toward the end of the deadline. And then I guess, one thing that I think is really important is just to ask questions. I'm not shy about asking questions. There aren't dumb questions. I know that Jessica heard from me quite a bit in the last couple of years, because it just makes sense to get to be sure you're understanding like what it is that OHCS is looking for. And then being just I think flexible and nimble, throughout the process, just to make sure you're, I would say, typically there may be some FAQs that come out, or there may be minor modifications, just making sure you're keeping up with, what OHCS is offering in terms of technical assistance. And then I guess that was my last piece. I think really just demonstrating, trying to make your application a strong contender by demonstrating that you can do this work, that you have the capacity, and for those applicants who may be smaller or emerging, again, just making the case, asking a peer reviewer, a peer applicant to see that, see if what you're presenting is the compelling applications that OHCS is looking for. And I think that would be it. As far as pro forma, that is not necessarily my area of expertise, but again, like getting those construction cost estimates early on, and trying to be realistic. I would, say not to be too conservative, but being realistic, having those quotes is really important too, so that the project application that you're taking to OHCS is really what you're going to end up in the end. So I think those are some of my thoughts. Jessica, I don't know if there are questions or you want to wrap up.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for joining us, Sarah, and for those thoughtful tips. I hope that anyone who's here today can use those and use what you've said as a resource to build strong applications. There's like 3 minutes left in the presentation today, and I'm willing to stay behind for a little bit if there's any pressing questions afterwards, just since I seem to have overestimated how long I will, or underestimated how long I would talk. So just, I guess, really quick, just there, I have a couple of slides I want to close out with. This is a question that I was asked at the last meeting that I was not able to answer. So I just wanted to share that we have decided an answer for this one. The question is regarding how to handle multi-phase applications that are going to require more than $8 million lift, which is our cap. Our advice still stands that we would prefer if you submit your first phase. So you'll need to phase those two that one project into at least 2 phases. Our preference is still that you submit the first phase this year and submit later phases in later funding years. But we will consider your second phase if you want to submit it. If you remember the cohort model, our first cohort, we're going to focus on first priority applications before we move to second priority applications. If you submit your second phase, it'll be a second priority or a third priority, depending on your what you selected as. So there's a chance that it might not be selected. We also need to treat it as a totally separate application and project. So it's going to need its own pro forma. Your site plan is going to need to clearly indicate what's phase 1, what's phase 2. We cannot adjust your first phase application if you don't get your second phase. So like if it's a $9 million project and you split it into $5 million in the first project and $4 million in the second, if you don't get the second, you can't make the first one $8 million. So you're just going to be stuck with that $5 million submission. And then your second phase, if it does get approved, it does still need to be submitted or completed within 36 months. So please don't submit a 5-year plan and try to complete it or say you'll complete it in 3 years when you know you're not going to be able to. We're available for technical assistance at any time. I won't go into any details here. We have this resource slide available. We're going to have this pro forma training next week, so I hope that you all will attend that as well. And that is everything. I'm happy to stay behind a little bit to answer questions if you all have anything pressing. Otherwise, feel free to email me or this ho.development email address. That is kind of our primary contact for the NOFA. That is in the NOFA document on our website. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to stay behind to answer questions. If not, I definitely want to be respectful of your time, and I appreciate you being here today as well. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I can stay for a little. That's fine.
great. Thank you so much. Yeah, and then everyone else, I also want to be respectful for your time. I've already gone 1 minute over, and I apologize for that. But thank you all for being here today. We look forward to working with you on your applications. Hopefully, I'll see you at our next training session. And yeah, thank you again for joining us. And I hope you, if you're leaving, I hope you have a great day. If you're staying, feel free to raise your hand or put your questions in the chat for Susie to call out.
Go ahead, Amy.
So I have a handful of questions, Jessica. Would you prefer that I ask them clarifications rather on questions? Would you prefer that I ask them here so it's recorded and others can hear, or do you want me to set up a meeting with you separately?
You can ask them here. If
Oh,
there's
goody.
any other questions too, I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone. But yeah, happy to answer your questions
Yeah.
here if you want to ask them.
Okay. My first one is a clarification on the equity section. All of the narrative questions ask about a focused community in a singular sense to describe your focused community as opposed to communities. And I'm wondering if your intent is for us to pick one and focus on that, even if we have, let's say, 3 focus communities.
I wouldn't take any points off if you wanted to talk about all 3 communities. I also wouldn't take any points off if you wanted to pick one and talk about them. So whatever you would prefer to do is fine. I just don't think one way or the other would give you any additional credit.
Okay, great. And then under the stewardship section, there are 3 questions clustered kind of, I think, towards the bottom. It says, how do you monitor the habitability and need of maintenance of the homes? Can you maybe elaborate on what you're asking for there?
Yeah. So one of the requirements in our legal documents and our operating agreement includes that the awardee will need to ensure the continued habitability of the homes through the grant period. So this question is just essentially like, how do you do that? Do you like go look at the homes? Do you make them send you pictures of homes? Do you do anything? Um, do you just like make them fill out a survey that says their home's still great? Just that's kind of what we're looking for.
Okay. And for a program that generally does that at home turnover from buyer to buyer, does OHCS have expectations of monitoring? Like, let's say someone stays in their home for a full 30 years. It is our kind of philosophy to, that's your home. We're not going to ask you what condition your carpet's in, for example. Is that something you're expecting, though, or would prefer?
So our operating agreement is the 20 years and then the following 20 years. So that is a requirement to continue to be in compliance with LIFT, is to just continue that, making sure that the home is in habitable condition. I don't think we're going to go be taking pictures of anyone's homes after 30 years. And we also understand that, 30 years is still a little old for homes sometimes. And that's the point that you're going to start seeing, it's kind of a typical early lifespan for a lot of things in homes. So, we're not going to expect you to go in there and make sure that all the pipes have been pulled out and replaced and it can show its age. It's just
Yeah.
making sure that, it's not, the attic's not full of mold and there's not holes in the roof and those sorts of things.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll do my best. And then I also did have just a clarification on the two below it. When it talks about actions taken in the case of resident turnover, you're referring to resales, correct?
Yes. Yeah. If the home's resold, what are the steps that you take?
Okay. And then the last one I have, it's in the, I just lost it. Project details under accessibility. There is a section about percentages of the homes that are visitable with a downstairs bedroom, universal design, etc.
Yes.
And I just want to confirm, so if we have some homes in the project that are going to be built to universal design standards, by default, because those standards are so high, it also meets visitability standards. And potentially also visitability plus a bedroom on the main floor. Can you count in all those categories?
Yes. So your home can earn, like one unit can earn credit in all of those different categories if it meets that criteria.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Mhm.
That wasn't too long, I guess.
No, I appreciate the thoughtful questions and for you pre-reviewing everything already.
Thank you.
Jessica, once these recordings are ready, where will those be sent so that folks can access them?
Yeah, we're going to post those on our NOFA page. So the same place that you download the NOFA document and the scoring rubric, we'll add a little section for training. Actually, um, we have the section already that has the different trainings and the schedule and the link to register. We will post the presentation document and the recording in that exact same space.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So many people have stayed behind. I'm really surprised to see that. Are there any other questions? I'm still happy to stay and answer anything.
Jessica, could you talk a little more about what you're hoping for and hearing on the focus communities question in the equity section? Like what are you hoping for with focus communities, and also ensuring that all of us are not violating anything in terms of fair housing?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have anything specific that we're looking for other than that community is underserved in homeownership in some way. So if you have a target community that you have determined yourself is underserved in homeownership, and you can, I think in that very first question, we ask you to say why they're considered underserved in homeownership. Then we will move forward with whatever you've selected, so long as you have that justification there. So we aren't able to tell you exactly what you should put there. But I will say in regards to fair housing, most of our questions are more tailored towards marketing and outreach and inclusion in your processes. So it's not like we want you to set aside homes specifically for those people, and that's the only way you can earn points. But it is acceptable to do the outreach and the marketing and the inclusion on those.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad I could answer that. I think I had a larger explanation for that in those slides that I had to not talk about for timing purposes. So I'm actually extra glad that you asked about that, Scott. Thank you. Here at OHCS, we have the conversation or the belief that you need to allow 7 seconds, and that's the point that the silence has been long enough that it gets awkward that someone's going to speak up. So I will wait the requisite 7 seconds, and then if I don't see or hear from anyone else, I'll go ahead and end this meeting. So I'll just preemptively say again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying late. Thank you, Sarah, for being available for questions late and for your presentation of tips and tricks. I appreciate everyone for being here. Now, I will wait. I can't have a countdown on the screen. So. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Jessica. We could do our counts by 1 affordable home, 2 affordable home, 3 affordable home.
All right.